Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Triangle Center for Spiritual Living on this absolutely glorious day. I see that many people have already headed to different places like south and to watch the eclipse tomorrow. I know that a number of people had planned some big weekend event around all of it. So I would love it if you all in that back section would come forward. And you can sit in the back of the front section if you want to, but I would love for you to come forward just a little bit. Isn't it a beautiful day? So welcome also to those of you who have invited us into your homes today through the technology of Facebook Live. We're very glad that you have joined us, so welcome. And is there anyone that is here for the very first time? I actually know that there is, so I would love for us all to welcome everyone. So grateful for your being there. My name is Reverend Dusty Ripplemeyer, and I am the spiritual director of this amazing community. We are part of a larger organization called Centers for Spiritual Living, which simply means that we follow the teachings of Ernest Holmes. And he never really wanted to be really a religion so much. He really wanted and felt that it was more of a philosophy and a way of living, a way of being in the world. But we believe that there is one God, and that God is benevolent, that God is within us and surrounds us, that is everywhere at all times, and that it is more than happy, ready, willing, and able to give us the kingdom of heaven on earth. We also believe that there is a power and for creativity in the world, that God created everything that you see and everything that we don't see. And through our divine connection with God, we are able to co-create. And so we have the power to co-create our lives, our own lives. That it was our thoughts and our beliefs that created the experiences that we're experiencing right now. And if we don't like them, then we have the ability to change them. And so we are here together today to really honor and celebrate God, and to honor and celebrate our oneness with God and with each other, and to support each other on our spiritual path. So thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you. The readings for today are from the Buddha and the Dalai Lama. The Buddha says, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself. And that person is not found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." The Dalai Lama says, "If you do not love yourself, you will not be able to love others. If you have no compassion for yourself, then you're not capable of developing compassion for others." And so it is.
So welcome to those of you who may have just arrived in the sanctuary. The theme for, yeah, you too. That's who I'm talking to. The theme for the month of August is love, compassion, and caring. And my talk title is Be Kind to Yourself. And it's really the third installment in a conversation about compassion. And most specifically today, it is about self-compassion. So just take a moment to notice the image on this slide. It depicts a person standing in front of a mirror and embracing the image that's reflected by the mirror. How do you feel as you look at this image? Do you feel warmth and peace and love, or does it make you feel a little bit uncomfortable? Are you someone who really loves yourself, or do you see only your flaws? Are you someone who is kind to yourself, or are you overly critical about who you are and the way that you're living your life. And if you are highly self-critical, what kinds of things do you find yourself typically being critical and judgmental about? What kind of language do you use with yourself when you happen to notice some little flaw or make a mistake? Do you beat yourself up? Do you insult yourself? Or do you use a more kind and understanding tone with yourself? All good questions. All things to think about. How about this? How do you treat yourself when you run into difficult challenges in your life? Do you tend to ignore the fact that you're suffering and focus exclusively on fixing the problem, or do you take just a moment to give yourself some care and comfort? Do you tend to get overly carried away by the drama of the difficult situations and then make a bigger deal out of them than is actually necessary? Or do you tend to keep a more balanced perspective about the situation? Do you tend to cut yourself off from others when you're moving through something difficult or when things go wrong? Or do you remember that all people experience hardships at different times in their lives? In this incredibly competitive society of ours, how many of us, even here sitting in this room, let alone all over the planet, how many of us in this room really care about ourselves, really love ourselves, really treat ourselves well? In fact, my guess is that there are many of us sitting here this morning that are right now criticizing themselves for their lack of self-compassion. Am I right? Christine Neff, in her book, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, says, from the Buddhist point of view, we have to care about ourselves before we can really care about other people. If we are continually judging and criticizing ourselves while trying to be kind to others, we are drawing artificial boundaries and distinctions that only lead to feelings of separation and isolation. These are those walls that Michael was talking about. This is the opposite of oneness, of connection, of interconnection, and of universal love, the ultimate goal of most spiritual paths, no matter which tradition. Self-compassion. Sadly, however, there's almost no one who treats us as badly as we treat ourselves. Our culture does not emphasize self-compassion. In fact, more often than not, it emphasizes exactly the opposite. We're often told that no matter how hard we work, our best just isn't good enough. And we often buy into that. Our own self-talk, the way that we speak and how we talk to ourselves, is more harsh typically than anyone has ever been or will ever be to us. We can even be suspicious of self-compassion because race consciousness says that it is self-indulgent and that it's dripping of self-pity. So we tend to shy away from it. But is that really the truth? The question to ask ourselves is, how has this way of being, this way of living without self-compassion been working for us? And the bottom line is that we can all benefit from learning to be more self-compassionate. Christine Neff says, instead of trying to control ourselves and our lives to obtain a perfectionistic ideal, why not embrace life as it is, both the light and the shadow? What adventures might follow if we free ourselves in this way? Happiness is found when we go with the flow of life, not when we rail against it, and self-compassion can help us navigate these turbulent rapids with a wise, accepting heart. Self-compassion can help us navigate these turbulent times, these turbulent waters. The invitation is to stop judging and evaluating ourselves altogether. Simply altogether. To stop trying to label ourselves as either good or bad and just fully accept ourselves, the whole of ourselves, with an open heart. To treat ourselves with the same kindness, the same caring, the same compassion, the same love that we would treat a friend or even a stranger for that matter. Christine Neff says that compassion requires 3 fundamental core elements. First, it requires self-kindness. Self-kindness asks that we be gentle and understanding with ourselves rather than harshly critical and judgmental. Second, self-compassion requires a recognition of our common human experience. This is feeling connected with each other in the experience of life itself, rather than feeling isolated and alienated by our suffering. Third, it requires mindfulness. Now, mindfulness means that we hold the experiences that we are going through in balanced awareness, meaning that on one hand, we don't ignore our pain, but on the other hand, on that flip side, we don't exaggerate it either. The bottom line is that we must combine all 3 of these basic, essential elements of self-compassion in order to truly be self-compassionate. So let's take a little deeper look at them. The first fundamental element of self-compassion is self-kindness. Now, in general, our Western culture emphasizes greatly being kind to our friends, to our families, and to our neighbors who are suffering, who are in pain, or who are in need. This emphasis on kindness, however, does not always extend to ourselves. When we make a mistake or we fail at something, we are more likely to beat ourselves up than we are to put the supportive arm around our own shoulder or to hug that image in the mirror. Self-kindness means that we stop that critical self-judgment that takes up so much of our mental landscape, that we let go of that cruel internal commentary that so many of us have just begun to think that it's just normal. That's the way everybody lives, right? It means to understand and to even embrace ourselves without condemning ourselves. That we don't have to do that first. To remember that at any given moment we are absolutely doing the very best we can, and that if we knew better, we would do better. Self-kindness stresses the importance of using sympathetic rather than judgmental language with ourselves. It asks us to reframe our internal dialogue so that we can actually express some empathy to ourselves. Self-compassion begins with stopping this self-judgment and and the critical self-talk, and then it actually asks us to comfort ourselves actively in some way. Self-kindness asks us to respond to ourselves in the same way that we would respond to a dear friend in need. Why would we do it any differently? Why would we treat ourselves any less than we would treat someone else that we loved? Christine Neff says it means we allow ourselves to be emotionally moved by our own pain, stopping to say, this is really difficult right now. How can I care and comfort myself in this moment? With self-kindness, we soothe and calm our troubled minds. We make a peace offering of warmth, gentleness, and sympathy from ourselves to ourselves, so that true healing can occur from ourselves to ourselves. The second fundamental element of self-compassion is this recognition of our common human experience. Self-compassion honors the fact that all human beings are fallible, that wrong choices and regrets are inevitable, and that we can all experience feelings of inadequacy and disappointment from time to time, that it's part of the human experience. Recognition of our common experience says that the pain I feel in difficult times is the same pain that other people feel in difficult times. Yes, the impetus or the triggers are different, the circumstances are different, the level of pain is different, but the process is still the same. It's exactly the same. Self-compassion remembers that everyone suffers and that everyone deserves comfort, including each of us. Self-compassion, however, is not always the path that we as human beings take. We are more likely to feel isolated and disconnected when we're feeling ashamed or feeling inadequate or feeling lonely. We tend to become overwhelmed and absorbed with feelings of insufficiency and insecurity. But this doesn't have to be the case. We have choice in the matter. We have dominion over our thoughts, and when we think about and are able to reframe our experience from this recognition of our combined human experience, from a point of view that takes in the bigger human picture, and from a space that remembers that anything can happen at any given time to anybody, when we operate from that space, recognizing our common human experience, then compassion is more available to us. We're recognizing it as part of this human experience, and compassion is more available. Christine Neff says, if we can compassionately remind ourselves in moments of falling down that failure is part of the shared human experience, then that moment becomes one of togetherness rather than isolation. When our troubled, painful experiences are framed by the recognition that countless others have undergone similar hardships, the blow is softened. The pain still hurts, but it doesn't become compounded by feelings of separation. We are all in this experience of life together. The third key ingredient for self-compassion is mindfulness. Now, mindfulness refers to clear thinking and non-judgmental acceptance of exactly what is occurring right now, in this moment, in this present moment. The idea is that we need to see things as they are, no more and no less, in order to respond to whatever current situation, whatever experience that we are going through in a more compassionate manner with ourselves. when we notice our pain without exaggerating, this is a moment of mindfulness. When we and on the flip side of that, when we notice our pain, when we experiencing our pain without ignoring it, it is a moment of mindfulness. Mindfulness entails observing exactly what is going on, just as it is, right here and right now. To give ourselves compassion, we have to recognize that we're suffering. We have to, in order to be able to heal, we have to be able to feel. Now, so often when we are going through a challenging experience, we immediately begin to tell ourselves a story. And that story is most often based on regrets from the past or on our worries about the future. And that story is playing so loudly in our heads that we are not even really aware of exactly what it is we are feeling in that moment. We can tend to catastrophize the moment, and we can tend to extend it out into the future in such a way that it doesn't feel good. Now, if we're making up the future and we're extending something out into the future, we should probably, consider making something up that's going to feel good rather than something that's not going to feel so good, right? Now, when we do that, when we have that story racing around, when we are so caught up in it, then there is no room left within us for any compassion. We are only concerned with our thoughts and our perceptions and our worries and our fears and our doubts and our regrets. That's all that we can focus on. So we need to see things as they are in the present moment, without the regrets of the past or without the worries about the future. Mindfulness allows us to see that the thoughts of the past and the thoughts of the future are just that. They're thoughts. They're just thoughts. That the past only exists in our memory and the future only exists in our imagination. They're just thoughts. Rather than being lost in that train wreck of those thoughts, we can, with mindfulness, we're able to take a step back. And we can take a step back, and in that moment of mindfulness, then we can really become aware of exactly what it is we are thinking. And when we can see that, kind of like seeing it as someone who's watching, the knower who's watching that thinking going on, right, then we're able to have the possibility of uncovering and then healing any kind of hidden underlying belief that's behind that thought. Rather than being lost in this train of our thoughts, we can take a step back. And that is a moment of mindfulness. And in that moment of mindfulness, then we are able to see what we are really feeling. What we are really feeling and what we are really experiencing in that moment. And when we are able to do that, that allows us to be able to feel the feeling without that voice overlay. And when we can feel that feeling without that voice overlay, then we have the possibility of becoming and expressing more compassion for ourselves, being more open to that. As I was preparing for my message this morning, I found many different strategies for being self-compassionate, many different, very practical ways of being kind to ourselves. So some of these include, number one, accept yourself. The invitation here is to accept yourself exactly as you are, with all of your strengths and all of your weaknesses. Sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you fail. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong. But the invitation is to just fully accept who you are, all of you, and to really know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the bottom line is that we are a divine manifestation of God, made in God's image and likeness. What is not to like? What is not to accept? What is not to love? The only way that you can ever really love yourself is to accept yourself. Number 2, consider how you'd treat someone else. So one of the very simplest ways that you can step into a space of more self-compassion is to imagine how you would be if someone that you loved came up to you and had a conversation with you about how they were failing or how they had been rejected. What would you say? How would you treat this person? And then, once you know what that is, then do it to yourself. Simply do it to yourself. Number 3, pay attention to your inner dialogue. You may be so used to criticizing yourself that you don't even realize that you're doing it. You know, what voice? What voice are you talking about? There's no voice inside my head. That one. So the invitation here is to pay careful attention to what you say about yourself and how you say it. To take the time to reframe what you are saying in a more positive, a more supportive, and a more spiritually true way. It may not be very comfortable for you to do this at first. It may feel kind of foreign, but the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more natural it will become. Number 4, begin or deepen your meditation practice. By doing this, we cultivate our inner wisdom. We get quiet enough to be able to listen for that wisdom, and then we're encouraged to listen to it. Turn away from that inner critic. Turn away from the outer critics. And only have ears for that still small voice within you. That inner knowing. That inner wisdom. Number 5, carve out some time for yourself. Every day, carve out a little bit of time for yourself, whether it's a big amount of time or a little bit amount of time, but carve out some time for yourself in order to do something that brings you joy, in order to do something that soothes you in some way. Now, perhaps this is as simple as making yourself a cup of tea, or maybe to choose to go on a walk in nature, or perhaps to enjoy a long bubble bath, or to get a massage, or to listen to some really amazing music. Be kind to yourself by giving yourself a little bit of me time. Number 6, invest in yourself. Now this is similar, but a little bit different. The suggestion is to take some time out of each day, maybe a little bit at the beginning or maybe a little bit at the end of the day, to read or to watch or to listen to some uplifting material. Some material that lifts you up, that inspires you, that motivates you, that assists you to understand the truth of who you are and to keep you firmly grounded in that truth. Number 7, give yourself some recognition. Often you are very quick to recognize and to acknowledge other people's achievements, but very slow to recognize and acknowledge your own. The invitation is to notice the good things about yourself and about your life, to become more aware of all of your achievements, whether they're big achievements or little achievements, and to consciously, purposely give yourself recognition for them. Give yourself the recognition that is due to you. Number 8, forgive yourself. No matter what you believe you did or didn't do, the only way that you are ever going to move beyond it and experience true joy or peace or love or compassion in your life is to forgive yourself. Now, this doesn't give you carte blanche to do anything you want to do, and you still might have to make a few amends here and there, but the invitation is to begin right now, here today, to let yourself off the hook, even if it's just a little bit. Number 9, respect yourself. Self-respect is valuing who you are just for being you and not allowing anyone else to dictate your value. It is trusting yourself, thinking for yourself, forming your own opinions, making your own choices, living your own life. The invitation is to begin today to be kind to yourself by being deeply respectful of who you are. And number 10, be kinder to others. The way that you think about and treat other people is the way that you think about and treat yourself, in many cases. Now, they kind of go hand in hand. One is reflected by and reflective of the other. So the suggestion is to be kind to others and then to watch how, over time, you become better at being kind and understanding with yourself. So the bottom line is that self-compassion means to be fully with yourself in a very aware way, in the same way that a loyal and trusted friend would be with you. It is a willingness to be with yourself as a loving companion in your own pain, a loving companion in your own struggles, a loving companion in your own sorrow. Self-compassion is seeing your own most tender wounds without judgment. As Ruth read in the reading today, the Buddha says you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. Along with your relationship with the God within, the most important relationship that you will ever have in your entire life is with yourself. So the invitation today is to be more compassionate with yourself, to be kind to yourself, always without hesitation and without reservation. And so it is. So I invite you to turn within. To allow this moment of inner reflection, this moment of stillness, to allow us to be acutely aware of that presence within us, that spark of the divine, that Christ consciousness, that space and place of unconditional love and compassion, of joy, of creativity, of peace, of love. I know that it is who and what I am at my very core. I know that I was created by God, out of God, in its image and likeness. That all that it is, I am. And just as I know that this is my truth, I know that it is true for each and every person sitting here today, that each of us is a unique and divine expression of the divine. And it is from that place of unity, this divine connection, connected by this golden thread of God's stuff that weaves itself throughout all of life, that I speak these words about and for each of us today. Truly knowing that there is a way in which we can live our lives from a space of compassion, deep and abiding compassion, not only for our family and our friends, our loved ones, for those of us in this community, but for ourselves. To know that we are worthy of that. I claim ease and grace for us around accepting ourselves, around forgiving ourselves, around respecting ourselves, around allowing that compassion that is at the core of our being to inform our way of being with ourselves. To know that we are not our foibles or our mistakes or our weaknesses. Yes, they are a part of who we are, but they do not define us. And so we can accept them, the whole of who we are, and by doing so, we enter a new way of being in our lives. A way that is quieter and gentler, less judgmental, less critical, more loving. And I claim for each of us that as we do so, we inspire that in others. And that then inspires someone else and someone else and someone else. And that until a time when compassion becomes a way of life for the entire planet. I know that this is possible. I know that it starts within me. I know that it starts within each of us individually and collectively as the Triangle Center for Spiritual Living. So begin it today. I know that we all can. I'm so grateful to know this truth and to speak these words. So grateful for the power of prayer, knowing that these words are loosed into a law that only ever says yes. That they are made whole, perfect, and complete, even as they are spoken. And so I speak them and I release them with love and with gratitude and full expectation of their manifestation. Letting go and letting God simply be God. And I invite each of us to anchor them for ourselves and for each other, simply by saying, and so it is. Amen.